If you clicked on this video, I already know something about you that most people in your life have never understood. You are not lonely. You are alone on purpose. And there is a difference between those two things that almost nobody around you has ever bothered to learn. You can be in a room full of people who love you, your family, your church, your closest friends, and still feel like a part of you is standing just outside the circle, watching, listening, but never fully landing. You learned a long time ago that the noise of the crowd costs you something. That after a long day surrounded by voices, you don't feel filled up. You feel emptied out. And the only thing that puts you back together is a closed door, a quiet hour, and the strange peace that finally arrives the moment you are by yourself. People have called you cold. They've called you distant. Maybe somebody you loved once said you were hard to reach, and you carried that word like a wound, wondering if something inside you was broken. I'm here to tell you it isn't. There is a reason you crave the quiet. There is a reason the solitude doesn't frighten you the way it frightens others. It comforts you. And that reason almost always reaches back further than you think. It reaches back to a child. A very specific kind of child. The kind of child you used to be. My name is George. For years I sat with people who carried this same quiet ache. People who felt called to something they couldn't name. Who felt set apart in a way that looked like loneliness from the outside, but felt like a calling from the inside. And what I've come to understand is that the people who learn to love being alone are very often the people heaven marked early, marked before they could even understand what was happening to them. So, let me walk you through this. Not as a lecture, as a conversation between two people who already understand each other. Because the truth about why you prefer to be alone, the hidden truth almost nobody will tell you, begins in the soil of your childhood. And it is far more beautiful than anyone ever made it sound. Let's start with the home you grew up in. For a lot of people who learn to love solitude, the house they grew up in was loud in a way that had nothing to do with noise. Maybe there was tension you could feel before anyone said a word. Maybe there was a parent whose moods filled the whole house, so that you learned to read the air the second you walked in the door. You became a student of silence. You learned to listen for what wasn't being said. You learned that the safest place in the whole world was inside your own head, behind a door you could close. Think about that for a second. While other children were running wild and free, you were already developing something. Most adults never develop the ability to be still, to go inward, to find a quiet room inside yourself that no storm in the house could reach. That wasn't damage. That was the beginning of a gift. Look at the boy Samuel. He was given to the house of God when he was barely old enough to understand what that meant. He grew up not in the arms of his mother, but in the quiet halls of the temple, sleeping near the lamp of God, while the old priest Eli slept in another room. And one night, in the dark, in the silence, a voice called his name. Samuel, Samuel. He didn't recognize it at first. He thought it was the old man calling. But it was God. Here's what most people miss about that story. God didn't call Samuel in the middle of a crowd. He didn't call him at a feast. He called him in the dark, in the quiet, in a room where there was no one else to drown out the sound of heaven. Samuel could hear God, because Samuel had learned to be alone. If you grew up in a home where you had to retreat inward to survive, you may have been doing the very thing that prepared your ears to hear what others can't hear. You learned to sit in silence. And silence, it turns out, is where God does some of his clearest speaking. There's something else about that story I want you to sit with. Samuel didn't recognize the voice at first. 3 times it called, and 3 times he ran to the old man. Sure, it was him. Because here's the thing about learning to listen young. You can hear the voice long before you understand what it is. Some of you have been hearing it your whole life. As a child, you felt drawn to things you couldn't explain. You'd lie awake and feel like something was reaching for you, and you had no framework for it. So you ran to the nearest grown-up looking for an answer, and the grown-up didn't have one either. So you stopped asking. But the voice never stopped calling. It just waited for the day you'd finally be still enough and quiet enough to say the words Samuel finally said. Speak, for your servant is listening. Maybe that day is closer than you think. Maybe it's today. So let me ask you something. When you go off by yourself, when you finally get that closed door and that quiet hour, does it ever feel like you're not actually alone? Like there's a presence in the room with you that you can't explain? Hold on to that. We're going to come back to it. Now, let's talk about the second kind of childhood. Because not everyone who loves solitude grew up in a loud house. Some of you grew up in a house where you were simply different, and everyone could feel it, including you. Maybe you were the child who asked questions nobody knew how to answer. Maybe you felt things deeper than the people around you, cried at things they didn't cry at, worried about things they thought were strange. Maybe you'd look at the people in your own family and feel, somewhere in your chest, that you came from somewhere they didn't quite reach. Not better than them. Just other. Like a letter that got delivered to the right house, but written in a language nobody there could read. And so you went quiet. Not because you had nothing to say, but because every time you said it, you watched the confusion cross their faces. And after a while, it just felt safer to keep the deepest part of yourself inside, where it couldn't be misunderstood. I want you to hear me. That sense of not belonging it was never a sign that something was wrong with you. It was a sign that you were carrying something they weren't built to carry. Think about Joseph, the boy with the coat of many colors. He had dreams, real dreams. Dreams that came from God, and the moment he opened his mouth to share them, his own brothers turned on him. They couldn't understand what was happening inside that boy. And what we don't understand, we usually try to bury. They threw him in a pit. They sold him off. They tried to erase the strange, dreaming brother who didn't fit. But here's what they didn't know. Everything they did to push Joseph away from them was actually pushing him toward the throne. The years he spent alone in a pit, in a foreign house, in a forgotten prison cell, those weren't years of punishment. Those were years of preparation. God was forming a ruler in the silence, far from the people who could only see him as strange. If you grew up feeling like the odd one in your own family, I need you to consider something. Maybe you weren't rejected. Maybe you were being set apart. And being set apart almost always feels like being left out before you understand what it really is. There's a third kind of childhood, and this one is quieter still. Some of you didn't grow up in chaos, and you didn't grow up feeling strange. Some of you grew up having to be the strong one, the responsible one. Maybe you were the oldest, and you carried weight that was never meant for a child's shoulders. Maybe a parent leaned on you in a way that meant you had to grow up fast, taking care of younger siblings, holding the family together, becoming the steady one, while everyone else fell apart. And so you learned, very early, that you couldn't always lean on others. You learned that if you needed something deep, comfort, understanding, peace, you'd most likely have to find it yourself. You became your own refuge. And that's why, to this day, when life gets heavy, your instinct isn't to run to a crowd. It's to retreat to a quiet place where you can gather yourself, where you can breathe, where you can find your footing again before you walk back out and carry the weight some more. This is the childhood of the one who learns to draw strength from solitude. And there is a man in Scripture who knew this place intimately, Elijah, the prophet who stood alone against an entire kingdom. He'd just won the greatest victory of his life, calling down fire from heaven in front of everyone. And the very next day, he was running for his life, exhausted, terrified. So worn down, he sat under a tree and asked God to just let him die. He was the strong one. He'd carried everything, and he had nothing left. So what did God do? He didn't throw him back into the crowd. He led him out to a cave, alone, on a mountain. And there, in the silence, after the wind and the earthquake and the fire all passed by, there came a still, small voice, a whisper. God met the exhausted, solitary prophet in the quiet, and the quiet is exactly where Elijah was restored. If you became the strong one too early, your solitude isn't you running from people. It's you returning to the place where you've always been refilled. You're not antisocial. You're a well that needs time to fill back up before you can pour out again. And the people who don't understand that are usually the people who only ever take from the well without realizing how deep it had to be dug. Now I want to slow down here, because I don't want you to miss what's happening across all three of these stories. The loud house, the strange child, the one who had to be strong. Three completely different childhoods, and they all lead to the same place. A person who finds in solitude what others can only find in a crowd. A person whose deepest moments happen alone. A person heaven seems to keep pulling away from the noise. And here's the part that almost nobody will tell you. The hidden truth underneath all of it. Solitude is the classroom God uses for the ones He intends to send. There are messages that pass through your eyes, and there are messages that pass through your spirit. If something in you recognized itself while watching, don't dismiss it. That is the Spirit confirming what was already written. The secret protocol carries 7 keys that unveil what heaven deposited in you before you ever arrived. Things no one around you has ever been able to name. It comes with the full audiobook for your moments of prayer, silence, and encounter with God. And you also receive the Awakening Map, the guide that illuminates the 5 seasons of spiritual awakening, revealing with precision exactly where you are and what comes next. The link is pinned in the first comment, but only for a limited time. Don't let this moment pass without a response. I tell you that because I've watched it happen again and again. The person who learns to be at peace alone is the person who eventually carries something the crowd cannot give them and cannot take away. Look at the wilderness. Almost every person God used in a serious way spent serious time alone first. Moses spent 40 years on the backside of the desert, tending sheep, with nobody to talk to but the wind, before he ever saw a burning bush. 40 years. The man who would one day stand before Pharaoh and split a sea first had to learn how to be nobody, in the middle of nowhere, with only God for company. David, before he was a king, was a shepherd boy left out in the fields, while his brothers got called in for the important moments. He was the one nobody thought to invite. And out there, alone with the sheep, he learned to play. He learned to fight off lions and bears. He learned to sing his heart out to God, with no audience at all. The solitude of those fields is exactly where the heart of a king was being formed. By the time Samuel came looking for the next ruler of Israel, David had already been shaped not in the spotlight, but in the silence. And think about the day Samuel actually came. The prophet asked to see Jesse's sons, and Jesse paraded them all out, the tall one, the strong one, the impressive ones, and never once thought to send for the boy in the field. They forgot him. His own father, in the most important moment of the family's life, simply left him out. And you know that feeling, don't you? The feeling of being the one not called in. The one overlooked while everyone else gets gathered up. But here's what I need you to see. The brothers who were impressive enough to be invited into the room were not the ones God chose. God chose the one who'd been left alone in the field. The very thing that looked like being forgotten was the thing that had prepared him. While his brothers were learning how to be seen, David was learning how to be true. And God has never once been impressed by the same things people are. Even Jesus. Again and again, the Gospels tell us. He withdrew. He'd be surrounded by thousands, healing, teaching, pouring himself out, and then he would slip away to a lonely place to pray. He would go up the mountain by himself. Before he chose the 12, he spent the whole night alone in prayer. The most important decisions, the deepest moments of strength, didn't happen in the crowd. They happened in the quiet, with the Father. So when you feel that pull to get away, when you feel like you need to close the door and be by yourself for a while, I don't want you to feel guilty about it anymore. I don't want you to wonder if something's wrong with you, because you are standing in the same place every one of these people stood. You are doing the thing they did before God did something through them. Now, I'm not going to pretend it's all a gift with no weight to carry, because it has a weight, and you've felt it. The hard part of being someone who prefers solitude is that the world does not understand you. The world celebrates the loud, the constantly connected, the always available. And when you need to pull back, people take it personally. They think you're rejecting them. They think you're being cold. And you spend a lot of energy trying to reassure everyone that you still love them. You just also need the quiet, and you can't always explain why. Let me say something that might lift a burden you've carried for years. You do not owe everyone constant access to you. You really don't. Even God built rhythm into the world. 6 days of work and a day of rest. Seasons that turn. Night that follows day. The whole creation breathes in and breathes out. There's a time to pour out and a time to be refilled. A time to be among people and a time to be alone with God. The people who never learn to be alone often never learn to hear the still, small voice because they filled every silence with noise. But you've made friends with the quiet. And in that quiet, you've heard things, sensed things, known things that you couldn't have known any other way. Think about the moments in your life when you knew something before there was any reason to know it. When you had a feeling about a person, a place, a decision, and it turned out you were right. When you woke up in the middle of the night with a name on your heart, a person to pray for, and later found out they needed it in that exact moment. That's not coincidence. That's the fruit of a life that has learned to listen in the silence. Your solitude has tuned you to a frequency the busy world can't pick up. And I'll tell you something else most people will never say out loud. The ones who are comfortable alone are often the ones least afraid of the truth. Because solitude strips away the performance. When you're alone, there's no one to impress, no role to play, no mask to hold up. It's just you and what's real. And that's terrifying for a lot of people, which is exactly why they fill every moment with distraction. But you've sat with yourself. You've sat with God. You've faced the quiet, and you've learned to be honest in it. That kind of honesty is rare, and it's powerful. There's a story I keep coming back to. The story of Jacob, the night before he had to face the brother he'd wronged years before. He sent everyone he loved across the river ahead of him, his family, his servants, everything he owned. And the scripture says Jacob was left alone. Just him, in the dark, on the wrong side of the river. And it was there, alone, that a man wrestled with him until the breaking of dawn. It was there, alone, that he held on and refused to let go until he received a blessing. It was there, alone, that he got a new name. He didn't get transformed in the safety of the crowd. He got transformed in the solitude, in the struggle, in the dark. Maybe some of your hardest nights alone, the ones where you wrestled with God, with doubt, with the weight of your own questions, maybe those were the nights you were being given a new name too. Maybe the loneliness you thought was breaking you was actually making you. I want to gently turn a corner now, because there's a difference I need you to hold on to, and it's important. There is solitude that heals, and there is isolation that wounds. They can look the same from the outside, but they are not the same thing. Solitude is when you withdraw, to be filled, to listen, to rest, and then you return more whole than when you left. Isolation is when you withdraw to hide, to nurse a wound that never closes, to cut yourself off because somewhere along the way you stopped believing you were worth being known. If you grew up in one of the homes I described, it's possible the gift of solitude got tangled up with the wound of feeling unwanted. And I don't want you to confuse the two. The quiet was always meant to be a sanctuary, not a prison. God leads people into the wilderness, but he never means for them to live there forever. The wilderness is a season, not a sentence. Moses came out. Elijah came out. David came out. Even Jesus came out of the wilderness, the scripture says. He came out in the power of the Spirit, and then he began everything he was sent to do. Here's a simple way to tell the two apart, and I want you to hold on to it. Ask yourself what the quiet is doing to you. When you come out of it, do you come out softer or harder? Do you come out more able to love the people in your life, or more walled off from them? Healthy solitude always sends you back. It fills the well, so the well can pour. But if the quiet is making you bitter, if it's becoming a place where you rehearse every way the world has let you down, then that's not the sanctuary anymore. That's the wound talking. And the beautiful thing is, the same God who meets you in the good silence is more than able to heal the silence that's gone sour. You just have to be willing to let him in, instead of using the solitude to keep even him at arm's length. So, if you've slipped from healthy solitude into something heavier, if the quiet has started to feel less like peace and more like a place you're hiding from a world that hurt you, hear this with all the gentleness I can put into it. You were not made to disappear. You were made to be filled in the quiet, and then to come out carrying something this world desperately needs. The door is meant to open again. The well is meant to pour out. The shepherd boy is meant to become the king. And here's the most tender part of all of it. You are not actually alone in your solitude. You never were. That presence you feel sometimes in the quiet, that sense that the room isn't as empty as it looks, that's not your imagination. The God who called Samuel in the dark is in the room with you. The God who whispered to Elijah in the cave is sitting in your silence. The God who walked with David through the fields is walking with you through your quiet hours. You learned to be alone so young, but the truth is, you were being accompanied the entire time by the one who would never leave. The world looks at you and sees someone who keeps to themselves. Heaven looks at you and sees someone who learned, early and the hard way, how to be still enough to be found. So no, there's nothing wrong with you. There never was. The childhood that taught you to retreat into the quiet was the same childhood that prepared you for a relationship with God most people spend their whole lives too busy to find. The loneliness you carried was the long, slow shaping of a heart that could hear heaven. And the solitude you still crave today isn't you running from the world. It's you returning to the place where you've always been most yourself, most honest, and most known. You were marked in the quiet, and you are still being prepared there. Now I want to hear from you, and I want something specific, because this matters to me. Of the 3 childhoods, I described the loud house where you learned to go inward, the home where you always felt like the strange one, or the family where you had to become the strong one too soon. Tell me in the comments, which one was yours? Just name it. And if you can, tell me one moment, one single moment, when you were alone and you felt that presence. I talked about the sense that the quiet wasn't really empty. Write it down for me. I read these, and I think the moment you put it into words, you'll understand your own solitude in a way you never have before.